I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be.
If you watched that moment play out back in July of 2018 and thought to yourself, this isn't going to end well, you were correct. After spending a couple of hours with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Helsinki, the former president, Donald Trump, arrived at the conclusion that Vladimir Putin did not interfere with the 2016 U.S. presidential election because he said so. Donald Trump publicly sided with the Russian autocrat over U.S. intelligence agencies, which had already concluded that Russia was, in fact, behind the effort to tip the scale in Trump's favor in 2016. Donald Trump did try and walk those comments back a full 24 hours later, saying that he misspoke. But the damage was already done, and we didn't know it at the time. But there was another scenario playing out behind the scenes. A discredited rumor being spread by Republican allies, Trump advisors, and the president himself. What if it actually was Ukraine that meddled in the 2016 U.S. election and not Russia? Almost 1 year to the day after Trump defended Vladimir Putin in Helsinki, Trump had what he later described as a perfect phone call with the new leader of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. Zelensky was a popular actor. He was a comedian who had run a populist campaign against years and years of political corruption in Ukraine's government. The Ukrainian people had launched 2 revolutions in the space of a decade, trying to get themselves a political system that worked, one that wasn't beset by corruption. The election of this young, charismatic populist leader felt like a real opportunity for some Ukrainians. Putin, though, saw his own opportunity. He saw Zelensky as weak, as inexperienced, as being in over his head, the perfect scenario to further squeeze Ukraine, which had been increasingly leaning toward Europe and the West and away from Russia. In this moment, what Ukraine really needed was its biggest and strongest partner, the United States, to step up and say that Ukraine and its new president had the full backing, respect, and support of the United States, something that had near universal support in the U.S. Congress. Instead, what Ukraine got was a lying, scheming, double-crossing U.S. president who was prepared to defy U.S. interests and policy in favor of personal political gain. And what Trump and his allies did was push that conspiracy theory about Ukraine interfering in the 2016 election. And then came that infamous phone call, which was, if it isn't already obvious, far from perfect. On July 25, 2019, Donald Trump and the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, shared a phone call. According to transcripts, Zelensky told Trump, quote, "We are ready to continue to cooperate for the next steps. Specifically, we are almost ready to buy more javelins from the United States for defense purposes," end quote. To which Donald Trump responded, quote, "I would like you to do us a favor, though. I would like you to do us a favor, though." Trump made $400 million in congressionally approved military aid to Ukraine contingent upon Zelensky doing Trump a favor by announcing investigations into his political rival, Joe Biden, and his son. Trump temporarily froze congressionally approved military aid to Ukraine to pressure Zelensky. All of this, of course, resulted in Donald Trump's first impeachment. And the only reason we even know about this phone call is because of a select few truth tellers inside the Trump administration, specifically the Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. Vindman, a national security advisor, blew the whistle and testified in Trump's impeachment trial that he heard that call. He knew it was wrong, and he reported it up the chain.
I was concerned by the call. What I heard was inappropriate, and I reported my concerns to Mr. Eisenberg. It is improper for the President of the United States to demand a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen and a political opponent.
Vindman was promptly removed from his post after Trump's impeachment trial. Anyone with an ounce of foresight could predict, "I would like you to do us a favor," though, was not going to end well. For Trump, he was impeached by the House, but ultimately faced zero repercussions. For Ukraine, the consequences were far more serious. Ukraine and its new, untested, uncorrupt leader needed to be taken seriously on the world stage in order to fend off Russian aggression. Instead, Donald Trump chose to try and leverage the situation for his own personal gain. And for President Zelensky, having that military aid frozen, having the President of the United States try to shake him down, that costs Zelensky in terms of power and respect and his authority against Vladimir Putin. After a year of warfare against Russia, Volodymyr Zelensky has proved that he is a strong and capable president and a military leader. But he started this war on shaky ground that Russia saw as an opportunity to invade because Ukraine didn't appear to have the universal backing of the United States. And that fact is on Donald Trump.